Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a time when the air smelled faintly of tallow and horse dung, the streets squished under your feet just a little too much, and the sky always seemed just a shade too gray to trust. We're headed into the Georgian era, not the modern day Georgia in the US, but 18th century Britain, where candle makers didn't just light the world. Some of them apparently predicted the weather. That's right. Before satellites, Doppler radar, or even your grandpa's cranky knees, some folks believed that a soft lump of animal fat could tell you whether it would rain tomorrow. You probably wouldn't survive this century, by the way. Between the damp, the open sewers, and the sheer volume of unpredictable candle behavior, you'd have a breakdown before breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. I love seeing the global bedtime crew check in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a narrow cobbled alley, boots slipping on rain-slick stones, the scent of something waxy and slightly burnt wafting from the open door of a crooked little shop. It's dim inside, but warm. A cat with a crooked ear blinks lazily from atop a barrel of soot-black candles. And in the back, standing over a large copper cauldron, is a man in a soot-stained apron, muttering about the shape of the drips. He doesn't look up when you enter. Feels like a wet one coming, he says instead. You glance behind you. Sure, the sky's a little gray, but that's not exactly rare. No, he continues. Not today. Day after next. You can smell it in the fat. This is Elias. And Elias has been making candles for over 20 years. His fingers are permanently shiny with wax. His eyebrows are mostly singed. And he swears that candle wax can tell the future, at least when it comes to the weather. See when it melts too quick or refuses to melt at all? Rain. When it bends before the wicks even set? Storm. He stirs the vat again, then gestures for you to help pour a batch of squat little candles into clay molds. The fat gurgles thickly, like soup that should not be eaten. You oblige, your movements clumsy, the mold warm and greasy in your hands. Outside, the wind starts to pick up. Elias nods like this confirms something. Told you, he mutters. The wind always lifts when the tallow catches. Historians still argue whether candle makers like Elias genuinely believe they were reading the weather, or if it was simply a mix of observation, superstition, and occupational boredom. Some say it was just folk tradition, a passing amusement among tradespeople with too much time and not enough fresh air. But as the shop fills with the scent of rendered fat and smoldering wick, you start to believe that maybe, just maybe, there's something to it. Or maybe it's just the fumes. You glance around the room. Racks of half-finished candles droop like sleepy bats. One is dripping more than the others. Elias squints at it. She's weeping, he says. That one always cries before the river floods. You laugh. He doesn't. Outside, a cart clatters by, its wheels hissing on wet stone. The air feels denser now, and you wonder, could this really be something more than coincidence? Course, Elias says with a sly grin. There's always the nose. You can train it. Wax picks up the air, see? Holds on to it. This batch. He lifts a ladleful toward his face and gives it a dramatic sniff. Smells like mud and mushrooms. That's October rain. Guaranteed. You want to argue. You really do. But the fat does smell vaguely earthy, and you're not entirely sure whether your brain is being tricked or if Elias actually has a point. The door creaks as a young boy enters, cheeks pink from the wind. He carries a soggy note. Baron says he wants 12 candles that won't melt during the hunt. Elias scoffs. Baron can have 12 that melt like tears if he keeps refusing to pay on time. You watch as Elias prepares a special batch. Extra beeswax, less tallow, a pinch of something that looks suspiciously like ground chalk. Dry days only, he murmurs. They'll hold shape if the air's kind. And with that, he pours the mix. The boy waits, fidgeting. The cat yawns. You lean back against the cool stone wall, letting the rhythmic drip of wax lull your thoughts into a slow blur. Maybe Elias is mad. Maybe he's right. Either way, you're already starting to forget the sound of the rain. The next morning arrives with a wet slap of wind against the shutters. Elias is already up, poking at a tray of half-hardened candles with what looks like a knitting needle. You yawn, stretch, and duck beneath a row of drying tapers as you head toward the cauldron. The wax smells different today, less earthy, more like old butter and something faintly metallic. Storm's changing its mind, Elias grunts. Might not come till after Sunday. You glance at him, then at the wax, which seems just as gloopy and uncooperative as ever. He wipes his hands on a towel and adds, The wax was clearer yesterday, scented sharp like split chestnuts. Now, muddled. He sniffs. There's confusion in the air. This morning's task is wick prep. You sit beside a crooked table where links of hemp string are being measured and cut. Elias dips each one briefly into warm wax to stiffen it, then hangs it on a frame. As you mimic him, you can't help noticing how intently he sniffs each new wick like a man evaluating wine. He offers you a string. What do you smell? You hesitate, then say, Smoke? Peas? Close, Elias says. That's brine. Brine means rising air. Rising air means shifting clouds. He doesn't elaborate, but he doesn't need to. He seems absolutely certain. Historians still argue whether candle makers were genuinely developing a sensory-based meteorology, or if they simply practiced what modern folklorists call pattern-matching illusion. It's when you notice a coincidence, then remember it as a rule. Still, some Georgian records show a surprising overlap between periods of unusual candle behavior and sudden atmospheric changes. There's a theory, admittedly fringe, that Georgian tallow absorbed airborne particles more easily than modern waxes, making it something of an accidental barometer. According to one half-forgotten diary in Yorkshire, the chandlers of Leeds speak by smell and guess the air's mood before it thunders. Back in Elias's shop, a customer arrives, the barmaid from the corner tavern. She plops a coin on the counter. Need a dozen by dusk. Our chandelier's dripping sideways again. Elias raises an eyebrow. Your man still sore from the last rain? The barmaid nods. Said the wax warned us. Should have listened. Elias pulls out a bundle of pre-cut wicks and mutters, You know the long ones melt too quick if it's coming from the east. She nods solemnly, like this is a perfectly reasonable thing to know. Outside, the wind has shifted again. You notice it this time, not just the direction, but the smell. Damp bricks, wet metal. Elias says nothing, just gives you a knowing look. At midday, he sends you to stir the cauldron. It's heavier now, the wax slower to move. That's the weight, he explains. Air pressure presses on it, makes the fat sulk. You begin to understand his thinking. The wax, the wick, the smells, all become small signals. Not proof, but hints. And candle makers, being surrounded by these clues daily, learn to read them in a way others never bothered to try. After lunch, a small chunk of cheese, and a heel of bread. You watch Elias prepare a test candle. It's a stubby lump, barely bigger than your thumb. He places it carefully on a narrow ledge near the window. "This is the nose test," he explains. "Watch the flame." The candle burns for a minute, then shudders. The flame splits slightly, then steadies. Elias points. "See that flicker? That's not wind, that's air pressure flipping on itself." You're still skeptical, but you admit. It's compelling, like a weather report with its own little heartbeat. A young apprentice from another shop arrives, his arms full of lopsided candles. "Something's off," he says, breathing hard. "Half our batch from last night won't stand up straight." Elias eyes the batch, sniffs one, and says, "Cold front." Candles lean south before a chill rolls in. The boy just nods, as if that explains everything. And maybe, in this world of low ceilings, waxy fingers, and thick air, it really does. As the day winds down, Elias lights one of the older candles, the ones that barely smell anymore, and places it in a chipped metal sconce by the door. "Not for light," he says, "for listening." You watch the flame dance as evening air curls in. Outside, a few drops tap the roof. Just a drizzle for now. But Elias already knows what tomorrow will bring. You wake to the unmistakable smell of boiled tallow and burnt toast. Elias has already lit the morning flame, and the shop glows with a soft amber haze. The day is humid. Your shirt clings, your hair feels heavier, and the wax in the vat seems almost reluctant to melt, as though even it's a little tired. "Hot days like this," Elias murmurs. The tallow won't sit right, takes longer, holds the warmth like a guilty secret. He says this while slowly stirring the great copper pot, the wax inside rolling like lava in slow motion. Around you, flies buzz in lazy spirals. The air is thick, still. The kind of stillness that makes your skin itch without explanation. Your job today is pouring. Elias hands you a ladle and points to the fresh molds lined on the work table, little pewter cups for the tavern down the street. As you pour, the wax bubbles more than usual. "That's the air talking," Elias says. "When it bubbles at rest, the humidity's rising, thunder before dusk." It's absurd, and yet not. Georgian candle makers like Elias operated with the kind of sensory awareness that modern folks barely notice anymore. Historians still argue whether this was intuition sharpened by repetition, or if certain environmental factors really did affect candle making in subtle, measurable ways. There's a French trade manual from 1728 that claims, "Tallow is the most honest of materials. It lies not about the coming rain." That same manual also recommends not making candles on a full moon, which makes you wonder if honesty was a relative term. Around midday, Elias begins what he calls the slump test. He pours 2 candles from the same vat. One goes in the shade, the other in direct sunlight near the open door. "Watch how they cool," he instructs. "The slow one's got secrets. That one tells if the weather's turning sour." You crouch beside them. The candle in the shade hardens evenly. The one by the door slumps sideways, as if exhausted. Elias taps its side. Storm's breath. Quirky as it sounds, there's some logic here. Candle making, after all, is an act of balancing solids and liquids. Air temperature, pressure, and moisture all change how the wax behaves. Before barometers were common in homes, some tradesfolk genuinely relied on craft clues like these. Later, a customer arrives carrying a waxy lump in a cloth. This one bent overnight, she says, clearly alarmed. Was straight before supper. Elias peers at it, turns it slowly in his fingers. A southerly gust, he pronounces. Low clouds, no sun, drizzle likely. She nods solemnly, thanks him, and hurries off, muttering something about cloaks and drying herbs. You lean close. She really believes that? Elias shrugs. She should. Last time her candles bent, the cornfields were under puddles 2 feet deep. In the afternoon, you light a few of the morning's test candles. Some flicker steady. Others lean into their flames like they're whispering secrets. Elias stands by watching, arms folded. Some people watch the sky, he says. We watch the drip. You chuckle. He doesn't. The cat returns, mysteriously dry despite the moisture in the air, and hops up onto the table beside the cooling racks. He bats at a half-finished taper. Elias shoos him off, muttering something about bad luck when a candle breaks sideways. You begin to understand that to Elias, this isn't superstition. It's a language, a slow, waxy, flickering language with its own grammar and strange poetry. As dusk falls, the warm air begins to shift. You can feel it too. Just a little drop in pressure, a restlessness, the kind that makes birds fly lower and dogs hide under carts. Elias steps outside for a moment and lifts his nose to the wind. When he returns, he simply says, "Boil 2 batches tonight. We'll need dry candles by morning." You don't question it. By now, neither do you question that the wax might just know something you don't. Evening stretches long in the workshop, and the candle molds are lined up like soldiers awaiting orders. The heat lingers, but the air feels heavier now, more deliberate. You move slower, not from exhaustion, but from some shared understanding with the wax, like you're both waiting for something. Elias, hunched over his string rack, carefully hangs the freshly waxed wicks like laundry in the still air. He hums tunelessly and occasionally pauses to rub the tip of his nose, as if that alone could confirm his forecast. "Too much bend in the line," he mutters. "Means mist." You raise an eyebrow and he nods toward the strings. Sure enough, the ends droop ever so slightly. Humidity's got hold of 'em. Good wicks stand proud. These here, these sag like drunkards. You peer closer, and whether it's your imagination or the power of suggestion, you start to see it too. The strings do look tired, almost bashful. You hang your own next to his and compare. Yours are worse. "First-timer droop," Elias chuckles. "It's a rite of passage." Outside, the sky has turned the color of pewter, and a haze creeps in along the rooftops. A thin girl appears at the door, holding a rough bundle of string. "Mama says to swap these," she says. "They went all wobbly." She hands over a tangle of soft, sagging wick cords. "She says that means fog." Elias grunts. "Your mama's not wrong." Historians still argue whether such micro-observations, like the bend of a string, could reliably correspond to weather changes. Some scoff, suggesting these beliefs were no better than astrology. Others defend them as early environmental pattern recognition, passed down through centuries of watching, doing, and trusting one's fingertips more than any sky. You set to work replacing the girl's cords, and Elias shows you a trick. Run the fresh wicks through a bit of warm wax, then stretch them gently against the drying bar. If they stiffen quickly, dry day ahead. If they soften again, rain. Yours sag. Elias doesn't gloat, he just pats your shoulder. As you work, he tells you how some chandlers in London swore fog could be forecasted simply by how wicks twisted as they dried. One bloke even said east winds tied his in knots. I say that's just clumsiness, but it did fog like the devil that week. There's something peaceful in the rhythm of this trade. Stir, dip, string, pour, cool. It's hypnotic, almost meditative. You find your thoughts drifting, lulled by the low hiss of cooling wax and the soft patter of the girl's bare feet skipping away down the lane. By lamplight, you hang the last of the day's wicks. Some seem to lean toward each other like gossiping villagers. Elias says nothing, just scratches behind the cat's ears and lights a taper. Watch the flame, he says again. Still, good. Dances, damp coming, splits. Expect fog, leans. That's the trickiest, depends which way. Tonight's flame dances lightly, as if swaying to unheard music. Elias clicks his tongue. Misty sunrise. A distant bell tolls the hour. The street outside is quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of hooves or a cough in the dark. You sit beside the fire, sipping lukewarm barley tea from a dented cup, eyes on the flicker. Your mind wanders to other cities, other chandlers, wondering if they too watch their cords in flames, guessing at weather with nothing but hands and habit. Back in the shop, Elias adds one more candle to the cooling rack. It leans ever so slightly. He taps it with a fingernail and smiles. That's a fog candle if I ever saw one. And somehow you believe him. The morning mist arrives exactly as Elias predicted, soft, clinging, and slow to lift. It seeps into the cracks in the stone and drapes the town in silence, like a damp curtain muffling all sound. The wax in the shop responds in kind, refusing to harden fully, clinging to the molds as though reluctant to face the day. You wake to the scent of cooled fat and beeswax polish. Elias is already bent over the table, leafing through a battered little book, its cover warped with age, its pages smudged with old grease. You shuffle closer and catch a glimpse of inked lines, some faded to brown, some barely legible. This, Elias says, is the candle seller's almanac. He flips to a dog-eared page and reads aloud, half to himself. If the candle guttereth in still air, the wind is near. If it flareth blue upon lighting, the sky will moan by sundown. You blink. The sky will moan? Elias shrugs. Old phrasing. Likely means thunder. The book is filled with verses, half poetry, half practical notes, collected from candle makers across the country. They describe strange patterns, how wax splits in frost, how flames hiss before snow, how dripping candles predict ill airs in summer. A rhyme reads, "When taper cries in quiet gloom, the clouds shall surely make more room." Historians still argue whether books like this were serious weather tools or just the Georgian equivalent of pub trivia. Some claim these almanacs were treasured family heirlooms, while others suggest they were more ornamental than useful. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, half belief, half performance, all wrapped in warm wax and cooler evenings. You run your finger down one of the pages and find a curious entry. Should 3 candles flare within a breath of one another, send word to the baker. His flour will dampen by morning. Elias nods when he sees your expression. Trade secrets, see? Bakers, chandlers, brewers, we all watch the weather in our own ways. One old woman near Exeter kept hens inside if her tallow smoked blue. Later that morning, a trader arrives, a lean man in a dark cap with a box of lumpy goods slung over his shoulder. He greets Elias with a grunt and sets the box down. Inside are a dozen stubby candles, each wrapped in coarse linen. "From the Cotswolds," he says. "Bad batch or bad air. Hard to say." The morning mist arrives exactly as Elias predicted, soft, clinging, and slow to lift. It seeps into the cracks in the stone and drapes the town in silence, like a damp curtain muffling all sound. The wax in the shop responds in kind, refusing to harden fully, clinging to the molds as though reluctant to face the day. You wake to the scent of cooled fat and beeswax polish. Elias is already bent over the table, leafing through a battered little book, its cover warped with age, its pages smudged with old grease. You shuffle closer and catch a glimpse of inked lines, some faded to brown, some barely legible. "This," Elias says, "is the candle seller's almanac." He flips to a dog-eared page and reads aloud, half to himself. "If the candle guttereth in still air, the wind is near. If it flareth blue upon lighting, the sky will moan by sundown." You blink. "The sky will moan?" Elias shrugs. Old phrasing. Likely means thunder. The book is filled with verses, half poetry, half practical notes, collected from candle makers across the country. They describe strange patterns, how wax splits in frost, how flames hiss before snow, how dripping candles predict ill airs in summer. A rhyme reads, "When taper cries in quiet gloom, the clouds shall surely make more room." Historians still argue whether books like this were serious weather tools or just the Georgian equivalent of pub trivia. Some claim these almanacs were treasured family heirlooms, while others suggest they were more ornamental than useful. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, half belief, half performance, all wrapped in warm wax and cooler evenings. You run your finger down one of the pages and find a curious entry. "Should 3 candles flare within a breath of one another, send word to the baker. His flour will dampen by morning." Elias nods when he sees your expression. Trade secrets, see? Bakers, chandlers, brewers, we all watch the weather in our own ways. One old woman near Exeter kept hens inside if her tallow smoked blue. Later that morning, a trader arrives. A lean man in a dark cap with a box of lumpy goods slung over his shoulder. He greets Elias with a grunt and sets the box down. Inside are a dozen stubby candles, each wrapped in coarse linen. "From the Cotswolds," he says. "Bad batch or bad air. Hard to say. By morning, the candle by your bedside has wept." Tiny beads of moisture glisten along its surface, like morning dew clinging to a spider web. You lean in, squinting in the gray light creeping past the shutter. Sure enough, your shoes are damp. Elias doesn't say, "I told you so." He just nods knowingly and hands you a chunk of bread that's already gone stale at the edges. "Wax listens," he mutters between bites. "More than most people do." Today, something's gone wrong with the molds. You spend half the morning trying to coax a stubborn batch of tallow candles out of their forms, but they cling like honey left out in the cold. You run your finger along the rim of one and find a thin ring of condensation. "Won't set," Elias sighs, peering at the half-melted shape. "Too much moisture in the air. They sense it." He isn't joking. And now that you're used to his waxy worldview, you're starting to agree. The air does feel swampy. The wax is more sluggish. Everything is sticky, even your own skin. Elias moves to his bench and rummages through a drawer full of wax test stubs, some cracked, some curled, a few with strange bubbles frozen mid-burn. He lifts one with a deep ridge running across its base. "This one refused to harden in 63. 3 days later, Thunder so loud it knocked Father Killian's wig clean off. You laugh, but the image sticks. Historians still argue whether the unpredictable behavior of wax was meaningful, or if people like Elias simply learned to tie every oddity back to the weather. But when you're elbow deep in fat that won't firm, and the clouds hang like wool above the rooftops, it's easy to see how the connection formed. A small crowd gathers just outside the shop. Merchants, washerwomen, 2 chimney sweeps in matching scarves. One of them leans in and taps the door frame. "Yours dripping too, Elias?" He gestures toward the shelves, sticking to the molds like a bishop to coin. They laugh. One of the sweepers pulls a pouch from his belt. Inside, 2 candles melted into unrecognizable shapes. "These were fresh last night. Now they're sadder than a weeping saint." Elias examines them. "Your kitchen window open?" "Always." "There's your answer. South wind. Carries salt. Makes the fat weep. Salt, you've learned, is the great enemy of neat candles. It creeps in through open windows, clings to surfaces, spoils a good set faster than a child with sticky fingers. Back at your station, you try again. New molds, fresh wick, a calmer pour. This time they set. Not quickly, but they do." "You're learning," Elias says. "You and the wax, both." In the afternoon, a traveling peddler wanders in. He smells of pine and pipe smoke and carries a woven bag full of oddments: ginger roots, iron nails, a cracked violin bridge, and 3 squat candles that glow faintly green in the light. "These were made during a fever dream," he says, half joking. "Burned them last week and the dog wouldn't come inside." Elias lights one. The flame curls, then flares wide, too wide. It sputters blue, then steadies. "Sulfur," he declares, "and rosemary." The peddler grins. "Didn't put either in." They spend a while debating ingredients while you inspect the strange candle more closely. It smells sharp, like something sour hiding under sweetness. Not unpleasant, just unnatural. Some candle makers, Elias explains later, swear they can smell illnesses in their wax, fevers, infections, even death. "A trick of the nose," he admits. Or maybe the air around the sick affects the wax too. That night, you light your own stubby test candle again. The flame this time splits, just slightly, into 2 little tongues before reuniting. Elias sees it and frowns. Sky's going to argue with itself. And sure enough, sometime after midnight, a brief windstorm whips through the alley, rattling signs and overturning a bucket. The candle, however, never goes out. You're stirring the morning wax when Elias says, quite suddenly, "The moon's wrong again." You glance up from the cauldron, unsure whether this is a joke. But Elias is dead serious, eyes fixed on a tiny window high in the wall, where a sliver of pale daylight slants in. "The moon," he repeats. "It's been tugging at the wicks." You let that one hang for a moment. Apparently this isn't just poetic thinking. Elias believes, firmly, that the moon affects how candles behave. Not just during full moons, when everyone's a bit strange, but in subtler ways too. The draw of the wax, the way the flame leans, how fast it burns. New moons, candles bloom too fast, like they're in a rush. Full moon's better. Wax listens more. He points to a small stub on the shelf, rounded, smooth, and slightly cracked. Made that on a waning moon, burned uneven, spattered soot like a drunk painter. You try not to giggle, but it's hard not to imagine a candle just giving up. Historians still argue about lunar folklore in trades like candling and bread making. Some dismissed it as astrology wrapped in grease. Others, especially in rural England, took it seriously. One surviving account from Devon insists that Moonlight shining on an unlit candle will sour its heart. There's no science to confirm this, of course, but there's also no record of a Georgian chandler trying to prove it wrong. The belief stood simply because it kept repeating. You're sent to tend the beeswax vat today, a nicer smelling task than the usual tallow stirring. The wax is golden and sweet, the fumes less greasy. Beeswax, Elias says, is more honest, though harder to work with. Less forgiving, like nobles. While you pour, Elias recounts a theory he once heard from a traveling Swiss candle maker, that goats could predict the weather through candle wax. Supposedly, he explains, if you make a candle in the same barn as a goat, it'll burn straight during dry spells and split during storms. You stop mid-pour. A goat candle, you ask? Goat candles, he confirms. He says it so flatly, so sincerely, that you have no choice but to believe. Later, a farmer's wife stops by. She needs candles that won't gutter in the wind, since their kitchen has no proper glass in the windows. Elias gives her a batch he calls stubborn wickers, extra thick, tightly twisted, and hand-dipped at a slower pace. They'll burn like a preacher's sermon, he says, long and unwavering. She smiles, then hesitates at the door. You seen the moon last night? Looked like it had teeth. Elias nods. Means a sharp breeze by Sunday. They both nod again, like that settles it. You begin to notice the rhythms of belief. It's not about superstition. It's about pattern and patience. When you live by flame and weather, you pay attention. You have to. That evening, Elias invites you to try your first moon batch. The moon tonight is waxing, nearly full. He insists this is perfect. You mix the wax slowly, folding in the beeswax and tallow in careful turns. The air feels cooler, but the warmth from the vat balances it. You add the wick, pour gently, and place the mold near the window. Now we watch, he says. The candle cools smoothly. No bubbles, no cracking. The surface shines with a faint sheen, and when you sniff it, yes, it even smells calmer. Elias smiles. You've got the hand. He places a similar candle beside it, his own moon batch from the last cycle. It's a little warped, a little dusty. They change with age, he explains. Moon-born candles remember things. You think he's joking, but the look in his eye says otherwise. And when you light yours and the flame stands tall, unwavering in the quiet, you feel something you can't explain, like maybe it's watching the sky with you. You're summoned early the next morning, not to the wax room, but to the manor on the hill. Elias hands you a basket of newly finished tapers, all uniform, tightly wound and polished with a touch of beeswax for shine. For the chandeliers, he says. They've got a method up there. You trudge up the hill, basket in hand, boots catching dew from the grass. The manor is vast and cold, built from gray stone and stiff expectations. A liveried servant opens the door before you knock and guides you wordlessly down a corridor hung with faded tapestries and portraits of people who look permanently annoyed. You arrive in the great hall, where two grand chandeliers hang from the ceiling like gilded octopuses. A woman in a crisp bonnet oversees their care, Mrs. Avery, the housekeeper. She eyes the candles in your basket, tests one with her thumb, and nods. They'll do. The Baron likes them to drip a little, just not on his wig. You help her replace the old stubs, careful not to drop any wax flakes on the polished parquet floor. Once the chandeliers are fully dressed, she stands back and crosses her arms. Now we watch, she says. You blink. Watch? The test, she replies, as if it should be obvious. Apparently, when the Baron plans to hunt, the staff watches how the chandelier candles behave in the hour after lighting. If they burn clean and upright, the hunt is on. But if they flicker, drip excessively, or lean, especially to the west, he cancels. He says west drip means bad ground, she mutters. Won't risk the hounds in mud. You suppress a smile. Does it work? Mrs. Avery raises a brow. Better than the weatherman, and far quieter. Historians still argue whether aristocrats genuinely trusted candle signs or simply enjoyed the ceremony of superstition. Georgian nobility often adopted rural customs when they seemed charming or conveniently predictive. One 1771 diary mentions a noblewoman who read dripping wax the way others read tea leaves and based her dinner menus accordingly. Back in the hall, the flames glow steadily for a while. But then one on the left chandelier begins to bend slightly, its wax curling along a gold arm. Mrs. Avery squints. Leaning west? Sure enough, by midday, a footman appears with a note. Hunt postponed. Grounds too soft. Likely fog. She folds the paper without expression. Told you? You return to the workshop with the empty basket, where Elias nods knowingly before you even speak. Chandelier test? Failed, he grins. Told you. Wax has manners up there, speaks politely. That evening, you and Elias light a pair of candles and place them on either side of the shop's front door. It's a tradition, he explains, meant to balance the house's humors. You're not sure what that means, but the ritual feels comforting. You notice that one flame flares wider, the other narrower. That's the house breathing, Elias says. One pulls in air, the other lets it out. You wonder how much of this is true, and how much is Elias spinning bedtime riddles for grown-up apprentices. But you don't care. It feels true. As the night draws in, the candlelight plays on the wax-streaked walls. Shadows flicker like memories, and outside the wind picks up. Inside, the flames lean ever so slightly. West. Baron made the right call, you murmur. Elias doesn't answer. He's already turned in for the night, the cat curled at his feet. You sit alone with the candles a little longer, their glow warming your hands, their wax pooling just so. And in the stillness, you start to feel the weather shift in your bones, soft, like the flick of a wick. Down in the cellar, things feel different, heavier, cooler. The air has weight like a damp wool cloak laid across your shoulders. Elias hands you a rusted key, one that smells like candle smoke and old iron, and points toward the narrow staircase near the back of the workshop. You're ready, he says. Go meet the archive. You descend slowly, candle in hand, its flickering glow bouncing across the low stone walls. At the bottom, the cellar opens into a cramped but orderly room. Wooden shelves line the walls, each one stacked with squat glass jars, bundles of old wicks, and rows of dusty candles in various states of decay. The scent down here is something between beeswax, mildew, and ancient tobacco. Elias's voice floats down behind you. Everything we've ever made that's acted odd, we keep it here. You run your finger along a shelf labeled March Flood, 61. There, a candle warped like a bent spine, hardened mid-slump. Next to it, a jar containing a stub of wax turned entirely translucent. On another shelf, widow's wedding candle, burned backward. You blink at that one. Backward? Burned from base to wick, Elias replies, now behind you. Didn't catch fire from the top, just sort of reversed itself. Thought the house was cursed for a week. Historians still argue whether such candle archives were widespread or unique to certain superstitious shops. Some were informal collections, scrap drawers and forgotten stubs. Others, like Elias's, were obsessive records. A few suggest that candles made during solar eclipses or comet sightings were considered too volatile to burn and were sealed away in wax tombs like strange relics. You pick up a particularly lumpy candle labeled Fog Flame, August. Its center leans sharply, the wax burned down one side, while the other remained pristine. Lit this one during a fog so thick the bell tower vanished, Elias recalls. Burned like it knew which way the town was. He opens a drawer marked Drip Forecasts. Inside are folded slips of paper, notes scrawled in graphite and charcoal, some nearly illegible. Double drip at midnight, thunder before dawn, pooled wax eastward, river broke next day. No burn, room too quiet. Then wind howled. These, Elias says, are the guesses. Some wrong, some right, but always worth writing down. You leaf through them like a sleepy librarian thumbing ancient poetry. There's beauty in the phrasing, even when it makes no logical sense. These aren't weather reports. They're fragments of lives trying to interpret the world with what they had. Wicks, wax, wind, and instinct. In the far corner of the cellar is a single candle on a pedestal. Unlike the others, it's wrapped in cloth, untouched by dust. Only light this one when the sea fog rolls in without warning, Elias says softly. It's from my father's batch. Never burned it. Said it was for the fog that forgets. You don't ask what that means. Back upstairs, the air feels lighter by contrast. You're handed a batch of plain tapers to prep for the Midwives Guild. They like 'em slow burning, Elias notes. Say the flame tells 'em when the babe's turned. You hesitate. Seriously? Some swear by it. One swore she knew twins were coming from how her candle split in labor. You're not sure what to make of that. But you take extra care dipping those candles. You cut each wick the same length. You stir the wax slower. And you whisper a quiet something over them before setting them to cool. That night, you take one candle from the archive, not a cursed one, just a small stub labeled Weather Uncertain. You light it beside your bed and watch how the flame leans slightly left, then steadies. It burns evenly all night, and though the sky outside remains unreadable, you sleep easily, soothed by the flicker of a flame that has seen more weather than you ever will. Market day begins with a chorus of shouts and clattering hooves. From your perch beside the wax vat, you can already hear the distant calls, vendors hawking salted fish, cloth, pickled eggs, and whatever else the rain hasn't ruined. Elias ties on his apron and says, "Best day to learn whose nose runs the weather." You carry a crate of stubby market tapers, cheap, quick molded, and meant to burn just long enough to keep a merchant stall lit during dusk sales. Elias isn't particularly fond of these candles. They don't tell you much, he grumbles. Burn too quick to speak. But the market isn't just about the candles. It's about the chatter. You and Elias squeeze through the muddy lane, stall to stall, delivering orders and trading wax gossip. The baker wipes flour from his nose and says, "My dough rose sideways this morning. Rain by supper, market." Elias offers him a candle and raises a brow. "Smell that and tell me again." The baker sniffs and grunts. "Fat's gone sour." "That's your breath," Elias shoots back, and they both cackle like children. Nearby, a fishmonger insists the scent of his haddock predicts wind. They whistle when the west's about. Elias replies, "Mine dribble when the east comes crawling." It's all nonsense, but there's a strange rhythm to it, a ritualized exchange of weather lore. Historians still argue whether this kind of folk forecasting had real value or if it was just entertainment disguised as science. But you can't deny how seriously everyone takes it. There are bets placed, not in coin, but in pride. A midwife points to your basket. "Got any of that flare blue on lighting? I've a birth due and the grandmother swears it wards off fevers." Elias rummages and selects one. "Made under a red moon," he mutters. The midwife nods, satisfied. You start to recognize the patterns. Who believes in scents? Who watches the flame? Who listens for the hiss of a newly lit wick like it's whispering secrets? The butcher, for instance, only trusts wax that cracks when cooled. Means the air's dry, best for jerking meat. One old woman offers a theory involving turnips, rats, and the smell of a tallow candle near a copper bucket. You don't ask her to repeat it. At midday, clouds roll in low and fast. A light drizzle begins, not unexpected. Elias sniffs the air theatrically. Told you. Wet nose, wet wax. You stop by the herbalist's stand, where bundles of dried sage and lavender hang like sleeping bats. She greets Elias warmly and offers you both tea and chipped mugs. "Your candle last week burned straight through," she says. "Didn't even flicker during the thunder." "That's because I used your mugwort in it," Elias replies, winking. "Cleanse the nervous wax." They sip in silence for a while, watching the rain bead on canvas. Then she leans in. "Tell me, Elias, between you and the baker, who smells the storm better?" He laughs. "The baker might smell it, but I light it." It's late afternoon when the wagers begin, a friendly challenge staged weekly. Which of the tradespeople will best predict the week's weather based solely on their craft? The rules are informal. A waxman, a baker, and the town's midwife each light one candle. They watch for the lean, the split, the flicker. Then they write their guess on slips of paper folded into a wooden box. You and Elias watch from behind your stall. His candle flares tall, steady, and just slightly golden. He writes, "Drizzle at dawn. Fog till second bell. Breaks before noon. The baker guesses snow. The midwife predicts clear skies. As night falls, you carry the leftover candles home in a sack slung over your shoulder. The streets are quiet again. Just the soft pad of your boots, the occasional hiss of a guttering oil lamp. You light one of the market tapers out of curiosity. It flares high, flickers left, then settles. Elias would probably call that a false start. But even so, you sleep imagining a town where everyone's dreams smell faintly of wax. It starts with a whisper. A rumor, really. Nothing serious. Just murmurs around the back of the butcher's stall, passed with a wink and a muttered, "The candle folk were taught by witches." You think it's a joke at first, a bit of market day mischief. But Elias doesn't laugh. He's polishing a copper mold with a rag and beeswax when you bring it up. He pauses mid-wipe, looks up and says, "Hedge witch, actually, not a witch. Big difference. And yes, mine was named Nettie." You blink. "You're serious?" "As thunder." According to Elias, Nettie lived in a crumbling cottage beyond the barley fields, under a roof held down with stones and crow feathers. She didn't sell potions or curse neighbors. She was a listener, to bees, to moss, and apparently to candles. She didn't make them, Elias says, but she read them, like others read palms or stars. She said wax remembered, that it soaked up air and mood and moonlight. You don't know how much to believe, but you're too curious to stop listening. Historians still argue whether hedge witches were true practitioners of folk magic or just clever herbalists wrapped in regional myth. In many Georgian communities, they served as midwives, charmers, and unofficial therapists, especially for tradespeople like candle makers and brewers, whose work sat halfway between craft and ritual. She taught me how to hear the wick before it burned, Elias says quietly. Told me that each flicker has a reason. It's not just the wind, it's the message. You don't press him. Not yet. Later that day, an older woman comes into the shop. She wears a shawl woven with ivy and walks with a crooked cane that clicks like clockwork. She nods to Elias. Need 3, thick, black and steady, for the solstice. He fetches them without question. You help wrap them in waxed cloth. She leaves a single feather as payment. Elias accepts it like coin. When you ask, he simply says, "It's tradition." That night, you and Elias light a listening candle. It's thick, wide, and infused with dried bay leaves, something Nettie apparently recommended for clarity. You sit in silence for nearly 10 minutes, watching the flame. It moves differently than the others, slower, more deliberate, like it's aware of being watched. Elias breaks the silence. She said when a candle flares blue but gives off no smoke, it means someone's dreaming of you. You look at the candle. It flares blue. You both laugh. Still, you can't shake the feeling that the candle's trying to say something, that it knows more than it should. Maybe Nettie was right. Elias shows you one of Nettie's old notes, written on bark-thin paper in a hand that slants like falling ash. It reads, "When wax cries in an empty room, ask who left the door open. No date, no signature, just a suggestion that makes your spine prickle." The next morning you find Elias sprinkling dried herbs into a batch of tallow. Mugwort, lavender, and something that looks like bone dust. Old recipe, he explains, for reading fog dreams. You mix slowly, letting the wax fold over itself like water curling through reeds. The scent is strange, sleepy, like a forgotten attic. You ask Elias if all candle makers do this. Some, he says, most forget. Others pretend they never knew. Later, a chimney sweep returns with a melted stub he calls the ghost taper. It burned silently for 3 hours, then hissed once and went out without smoke. Elias examines it. Too much rosemary, he says. Candles don't like being watched when they're guarding the house. Again, you want to laugh, but something in the air feels still, listening. That night, you light your own candle, just a simple one. No herbs, no bay leaves, just wax and wick. It flares once, then leans left, then stands tall. And for just a moment, you think you hear it whisper your name. By now, you've learned not to question the oddities. So when a candle burns blue at midday and someone mutters, "Hail's coming," you don't argue. You simply nod, squint at the sky, and wonder if you should cover the cart. Today's trouble begins with a bad batch. It's subtle at first, just a strange smell rising from the mold table, sharp and acrid, like burnt cabbage and iron filings. Elias frowns, dips a finger into the edge of the wax pool, and sniffs it with his eyes closed. "Sulfur," he mutters. "Too much." The sulfur wasn't added on purpose. Sometimes, if the tallow comes from an animal fed badly or butchered in poor weather, the wax remembers. Bad diet, bad fat, Elias says, shaking his head. Ruins the whole tone. But what's strange isn't just the smell. It's what happens when you light it. He trims the wick, sets it in a clean holder, and strikes a match. The flame flares fast, hissing like an insulted goose, then turns a pale shade of blue, the kind of eerie hue you expect to see flickering over a haunted moor. You both stare. Then it begins to shimmer. The edges of the flame quiver in unusual waves, like heat off cobblestones, and the smoke it releases smells vaguely medicinal or sickly. Elias frowns deeply. Last time I saw a flame like that, half the town got sick within the week. You blink. Are you saying this candle predicts disease? He shrugs. I'm saying the air's thick with something, and the wax noticed first. Historians still argue whether these claims were fear-driven folklore or early environmental observation. Some modern researchers speculate that unusual candle behavior might have reflected airborne chemical shifts, mildew spores, sulfur dioxide, or changes in oxygen flow. But most agree. The connection between health and flame was more psychological than chemical. Still, in places like Elias's shop, people took it seriously. That evening, a midwife arrives in haste. She's pale, sweating, and out of breath. Do you have a blue burner? She asks. Elias doesn't even flinch. Already lit it this morning. She breathes a shaky sigh of relief. 3 households down with fever. Something's riding the air. You help her choose a bundle of soot-catch tapers, candles designed with wide drip skirts that prevent smoke stains on the walls. These'll tell you if the air thickens overnight, Elias says. Watch for leaning flames and cracking edges. As she leaves, Elias turns to you with a half smile. You see, it's not always about rain. Sometimes the candle warns you about people. Later, the two of you experiment. You take 5 candles from the same pot and light them side by side on the workbench. One flares, then splits. Another flickers erratically and goes out within seconds. A third burns calm. A fourth weeps wax immediately. The 5th? It flares blue, then stays still. Elias strokes his chin. There's something in the mix. Something bad, you ask? Something interesting, he corrects. You make a note in the wax book. Blue flare, low drip, medicinal smoke. Potential sign of illness. Observe further. That night the workshop smells cleaner than usual, like herbs, soap, and a faint trace of sulfur. Elias leaves 2 candles burning at opposite ends of the shop and insists on sleeping beside the open door. Let the air walk through, he says. Makes the wax sleep easier. You try not to think about sickness. Instead, you watch your bedside flame. It dances once, twice, then settles. You fall asleep to its rhythm and dream of flickering corridors lit by candles that whisper warnings in languages made entirely of smoke. The rain returns by morning, soft and steady, turning the alley outside into a sluggish stream. Inside the shop, the air smells of wax, wet wool, and something stewed faintly in ale. Elias is hunched over the bench again, trimming candle wicks with the precision of a jeweler. Good drizzle for stories, he says. And as if summoned, the door creaks open and in stumbles Jory, the town's unofficial storyteller known more for his appetite than for accuracy. He smells like stale beer and burned onions and carries with him an object wrapped in oilcloth. Got a tale for you, he wheezes. And a candle to match it. He unwraps the object slowly, theatrically, revealing a candle the color of old teeth. Its base is lumpy, and embedded in the wax is something wiry. You lean in. Hair? Elias narrows his eyes. That a beard hair? Jory grins. From a priest, they say. Candle was made during his final sermon. His last breath blew out the wick. Then they relit it. You wait for the punchline. There isn't one. It's called a weather candle, Jory continues. Burn it before a journey. If it drips left, turn back. If it burns clean, roads'll hold. Elias takes the candle, holds it up to the light, and sniffs. Smells like mold and sermon notes. Historians still argue about the so-called weather candles of Georgian myth. Some believe they were simply normal tapers used ceremonially and retrospectively assigned magical properties. Others claim they were intentionally laced with odd materials, ashes, bones, hair, even fingernails, to enhance their supposed sensitivity to the world's moods. You ask Jory where he got it. Traded for it with a bell ringer who owed me 6 pickled eggs. Naturally. Despite the story's madness, Elias lights it. The wick sparks, then flares a vivid orange before calming into a low, steady burn. The flame leans west, almost stubbornly. Elias glances toward the shutters. Wind's turned, he murmurs. Jory looks triumphant. See? She speaks. Over mugs of lukewarm cider, he regales you with more stories. Some half true, some wildly impossible. There's one about a sailor whose candles would only burn aboard ship. One about a convent where the nuns made wax figures that sweated before famines. One about a candle that wept blood, but turned out to be red wine in a mouse nest. Despite the absurdity, you listen, because in this world of flickering shadows and smudged ledgers, every tale feels just plausible enough. That evening, inspired by Jory's chaos, you try your own experiment. You place 2 candles side by side, one made this morning, the other from a batch that cracked during last month's cold spell. You light them both, stare at the flames. One dances, the other barely stirs. Elias watches from his stool. They're arguing. You smile. About what? About how wet your boots will be tomorrow. You jot the results in the logbook. Priest hair candle, leans west, no drip, faint orange. Wind changed within the hour. You place the candle on the shelf beside other oddballs. Splitting saint, fog drinker, and weeping bride. By now, the archive is less a collection and more a family. Before bed, you light your usual bedside candle. The same stub, the same wick. It flares softly, then shrinks to a whisper of flame. Just enough to say, the sky's content tonight. The shop is quieter now. Even the cat, usually draped dramatically across the wax table like he owns the place, is curled in a perfect spiral beneath a low shelf. Outside, the sky has turned a dense, wintry gray, flat as parchment and still as a held breath. Elias stands at the soot-stained wall near the back of the workshop, holding a long brass candle snuffer like a pointer. This, he says, tapping gently on the blackened surface, is the map. You stare at it. It doesn't look like a map. Not really. It's a stretch of wall that's been allowed to gather candle soot for years, maybe decades. Patterns swirl across it, fine trails of black, odd clusters of dots, pale scratches where someone's fingernail traced paths. Beneath the grime, you can just make out tiny chalk marks, faded arrows, even numbers. The soot tells stories, Elias explains. Every drip, every puff of smoke from every candle burned in this room, it leaves its thumbprint. And we keep track. You can't help it. You reach out and touch the wall. It's warm, just barely, and the soot comes away on your finger like black snow. Elias points to a circular mark in the center. That was from the thunder month, 2 years back. Rain every third day, constant lightning. Candle burned high, guttered fast, left this curl right here. Historians still argue whether these soot maps were genuine records or just fanciful wall art developed by bored tradespeople with overactive imaginations. Some suggest they were part of candlemakers' private rituals. Others say it was simply a way to mark time in a pre-clock world. Either way, Elias takes it seriously. You spend the afternoon cataloging. He hands you a ledger, the pages brittle, edges curling like old toast. Each line lists a date, a candle type, the weather, and something called a soot code. There are notations like 7 Feb, beeswax taper, steady flame, soot 3B, curls left, no drip, 12 Mar, tallow plus rosemary, blue burn, soot 5, 3 specks, 1 streak. 19. Aper, full moon, church order, soot 0, no residue, silence. You learn the codes quickly. A 3B means the soot curled and clung to one side of the sconce. A 5 is more chaotic, spots and splashes, often following high winds or tension in the air. Elias hands you a stubby, soot-stained candle. This one left a whisper. You squint. A what? A thin line of soot shaped like a question mark. Happens when the air's confused. Can't decide what to do with itself. You light it to see for yourself. The flame flickers high, then dips low. Its smoke rises in a lazy spiral and leaves a single streak above the sconce. Delicate, curved, and unmistakably inquisitive. It's oddly moving. Later, you climb a small ladder to trace one of the oldest soot clusters high on the wall. Faint as breath. Elias steadies the ladder and mutters, "That one's from the year the river froze so hard the millstones cracked." The soot blooms like frost on stone, 4 small points in a diagonal line. You mark it down, then pause. "Do you ever clean this?" He shakes his head. "Not once. It's a living thing." That night, you and Elias light 5 different candles along the shelf and let them burn in quiet. You sip tea. He strokes the cat's head. You both watch the smoke curl upward and merge into shadow. After an hour, new soot is gathered. Just a little. Elias points to a slow draping line above one candle. "That one means gentler weather tomorrow." You nod, and beneath the candlelight, you think the wall sighs. It's your last night in the shop. You don't say it aloud, neither does Elias. But there's a quiet finality in the way the wick trimmer is wiped twice instead of once, and the candles are aligned with an extra sliver of precision. You've spent weeks breathing wax, memorizing the scent of tallow and rosemary, listening to flames that don't speak with words, but say plenty anyway. Tonight, Elias prepares one final candle. It's larger than the others, wide and squat, poured into a cast iron mold worn smooth by time. Into the wax, he mixes a few secret things: crumbs from old batches, a drop of elderflower water, and a single shaving from one of the weather candles. "This one," he says, "is for stillness." The shop is quieter than usual. Even the cat has left you alone, curled up beneath the soot map wall. Outside, the streets are empty, the rain gentle, barely audible. The town itself seems to be waiting. Elias sets the candle near your stool and lights it with the same brass matchstick he's used for years. The flame catches fast, then levels into a low golden burn. steady as breath. You sit and watch and wait. The wax begins to melt in a slow spiral, forming a tiny moat around the wick. The flame sways slightly, not to one side or the other, just forward, as if bowing. Elias leans in. Means the air's kind. Historians still argue whether such interpretations are romantic superstition, or simply the natural result of watching a flickering thing for too long. But in this room with this candle, it feels entirely possible that the flame knows. You reach for your notebook, now full of entries, soot codes, scent descriptions, bent wicks, blue flares. You add one last note. The last drip tonight moved like a yawn, gentle, deciding nothing, just content. Elias doesn't interrupt. He's focused on his own candle, a thin one tucked near the open window. It bends slightly, as if waving farewell. There's no grand lesson, no magical flame spelling out the weather for weeks ahead. Just warmth, wax, a flame that dances exactly the way you've come to understand it. You watch it until your eyes begin to close on their own. The workshop fades around you in slow brush strokes, shadows lengthening against wood and stone, wax softening under its own gentle heat, the scent of lavender and spent flame curling quietly in the corners. Your body eases into the stillness, like wax settling into a mold. Each breath grows longer, softer. You're no longer focused on the candles or the soot or the rhythm of cooling trays. Instead, you drift with the heat, the low flicker of light, and the small weight of knowing something very old has been passed to you, not with words, but with ritual. The walls sigh under the evening air. Outside, the street is hushed, the rain already a memory. The final candle beside you continues its slow burn, not asking for anything, not warning, not promising, just being. In its glow, you see all the moments again. The bent wicks, the fog that listened, the soot map, the whispering flames, the chandelier test, the weather almanac of riddles and rhymes. They settle like dust across your mind, quiet, heavy in the most comforting way. No questions remain, only rest. Let the flame finish its slow story on its own. Let it burn, lean, or whisper as it pleases. For now it's just you, the quiet warmth, and the wax softening into stillness. Sleep.